Hi and welcome back to the Housekeeper's Diary, and we're doing chapter 8 today, and it's titled The Writing Instructor, which I'm sure piqued your interest because it piqued mine. Now the chapter kicks off in early January and Diana's really excited because she's at Highgrove alone with the boys. Well, it's not alone, but you know what I mean. Charles isn't there, and Carolyn Bartholomew, her great chum, is coming down to spend the weekend with her. And when Carolyn arrives, Diana says this. Now, before we get down to a good gossip, guess who else I've invited? And Carolyn looked momentarily sort of blank, and then she said, David Waterhouse, the army boy, silly. He should be here just before lunch. Now, Carolyn sort of looked a little bit, uncomfortable. I suppose it's like anything. If a girlfriend invites you and then all of a sudden invites other people and you're expecting like a girly sort of weekend, well, sometimes it can feel a little bit disappointing. I also can't find any verification that Diana ever had any form of affair with David Waterhouse. It was always spelt out in all the books I've read that he was just a friend and she knew him from her school days, like I said in the last video. But I think at this stage that Diana's just looking for attention from any male. I think she's really lacking in confidence, and I don't think that's necessarily all her fault either. And I think she's just looking for admiration, and she's looking for verification that she's attractive, because by this stage, I gather that Charles and her relationship is not intimate in any way, and she's probably feeling like, what's wrong with me? But she's foolishly not looking at what's causing, the lack of attraction and all the arguments and the tantrums and the over-the-top behaviour, which would terrify someone like Charles. And he's not helping either, because he's retreating into his little shell and he's been, saying ouchy things. And so they're just so bad for each other. So I think she was just looking for a bit of love, looking for a bit of praise, looking for a bit of admiration, because she's still very young, isn't she? So Prince Charles was away for the weekend, having popped into Highgrove for a night alone the previous Thursday. Carolyn, who'd been to school with Diana, was one of her closest friends, and the two seemed inseparable. David, who was obviously a very good friend, was someone Diana relied on and bounced ideas off. Now, Diana said to Wendy Berry, I've known David for years, since my school days and everything. So I don't know. Anyway, this was significant, this chapter, because the staff noticed a great change in Diana. After the Christmas at Sandringham, she came back that January a different person. She was cheery, she was happy, she was positive, she engaged in a positive way with all the staff, and they said that the atmosphere of the whole house just improved, it was amazing. And it wasn't just Diana, it was Prince Charles as well. So Charles and Diana went on a tour of Australia, and they got back about February the 12th. And this was the opportunity for the staff at Highgrove to see them together. And they were sort of curious because they'd noticed all the press from the Australian tour, and it was so loved up. And they were gazing into each other's eyes, and they were dancing together, and they were laughing together, and they just looked like a couple in love. And we were impressed and completely convinced in Australia, I remember. And so the staff were wondering, what's going on here? And then Paddy said, well, they got a telling off at Sandringham over the Christmas. They got told to put on a better show and to pull their socks up and to behave themselves, because the whole atmosphere was so different. So they were really keen when they got back after this Australian tour, and they were, they wanted to see, was it just put on for the cameras, or had things really improved to that extent? So I'll just read you this little snippet about the loved-up pair. The first weekend of the new year together was a revelation, and certainly everything seemed to be much calmer between them. She goes on to say that the tension and dark atmosphere just seemed to have lifted. And she also said that it was great for William because he was now old enough to notice all the bickering and yuck between his parents. So she said it was much better and he calmed down a lot because it was calmer. It was a nicer atmosphere in the home. And she said a funny thing. The staff was quite overcome by the sense of domestic bliss. And then Paul Burrell said, this is an interesting quote, "They might still not have a lot in common," said Paul as he filled up another coffee pot for them in the morning, "but I do think things might be a bit more peaceful from now on." So there's all this sort of positivity, and Charles is really engaging with the two little boys, Harry and William. He always was a good dad and played with them, but he was playing with them even more, and he'd go up into the nursery and play Big Bad Wolf, and they'd have to rush past him, get past him, and he'd sort of grab them and then throw them onto a big squishy couch in the nursery, and there was, lots of laughter, and Diana was sort of joining in with them, not in that game, but it was just a better family atmosphere. They were getting on. Seems like the almost hate really from the previous chapter had calmed down a little. But it wasn't to last, which is really unfortunate and sad. And it was because of that terrible accident that happened in Switzerland, the avalanche. Now, Paul Burrell rang Wendy on Thursday, the March 10th. She was actually back in her real family home because they were off at the ski fields. So she was on holiday, basically. And she said she was just getting a joint out of the oven for her family, for her boys. And Paul Burrell rang. "Wendy, thank God I've reached you," he spluttered. "There's been the most terrible accident in Switzerland. The boss and the princess are fine, but Major Hugh Lindsay is dead. You better get back here as soon as you can." Now, of course, we know that it wasn't just Major Lindsay who died, but Mrs. Patty Palmer Tompkinson was badly injured as well. Now, this is where it's really interesting because Charles comes back to Highgrove and Diana goes off with Hugh Lindsay's widow, Sarah. Now, that's fine, and you can understand that she wanted to support her. But the trouble was, Charles was out on that run. He saw that his equerry and friend died, like right in front of him. He became very aware of his own mortality because he just narrowly escaped death himself. And when he came back to Highgrove, this is where it really moved me so much because Wendy Berry was saying that he was basically in shock and he was just so devastated. And he just sort of locked himself in his office. And she knows that he did get calls from his family, got calls from the Queen and Prince Philip and his brothers and sisters, but he just didn't say much. And he would often be red-eyed, red-rimmed-eyed, and she knew that it looked like he'd been crying, and he was just shattered, just genuinely shattered. And she felt really sorry for him because he could have done with a partner at that point. Now, again, Diana was doing the kind thing, supporting the pregnant widow of Hugh Lindsay. So I'm not necessarily sort of saying that she's doing anything wrong. And Wendy Berry isn't suggesting she did anything wrong. But all she's saying is Charles needed someone. He needed someone he was close to that could hug him and talk him through the shock, basically. Now, it's interesting, too, that his family just basically continued on with all their usual engagements. No one sort of turned up to see him in person. And, of course, I can't just cancel willy-nilly, and I understand that. But it's just a pity that, Anne or someone, and I'm not knocking her, but just someone could have been there, because Wendy Berry describes him walking up to his bedroom at night. And she says, and I quote, he just seemed a very lonely man climbing the stairs. Diana was in London with William and Harry, and Charles was at Highgrove very much alone. Now, she says that the avalanche and its tragic results pretty much wiped out all the goodwill, it seemed, between Diana and her husband. She said they now neither seemed the slightest bit interested in what the other was doing. And she says it was different, though, because it wasn't the huge fights anymore. They were very civil and polite to each other, but there was just no warmth in it at all. So now we get on to the riding instructor, and this is the bit that you've really been waiting for, isn't it? This is James Hewitt. Now, she says that Diana never rode at Highgrove, but she used to stop off with this riding instructor on the way down to Highgrove and get a riding lesson, and she used to get a riding lesson for William and Harry. Now, there was no need for William and Harry to have riding lessons because Marion Cox, the groom at Highgrove, taught them. So there's no need for that. And that's where I think it's a little tacky. Okay, if you want to have an affair, that's fine. Well, I don't know if it's fine, but okay, let's say it's fine, right? Don't involve your children. Don't involve your children. If I was having an affair, I wouldn't introduce that person to my children. That's where I would draw the line. I actually would draw the line to having the affair in the first place, but you know what I mean. It's like a double betrayal, isn't it? If you're going to have an affair and then you introduce them to your, your husband's children. I mean, I just think it's off, a bit off. I do. Might be a bit judgmental of me, I know, but it's just how I feel. I just think that's a bit tacky. All right, we'll go on to Wendy Berry's description of the rather gorgeous James Hewitt. He was pretty good looking right at the start of this. I mean, as he didn't age very well as he got older, but he was quite good looking. He was a handsome copperhead cavalry officer called James Hewitt. Now, you will notice that she met him and had an affair with him way after she had Harry. So, there's no suggestion that James Hewitt is Harry's father. So James' visits were at first sporadic, but he would arrive for the odd night when the prince was away. And she goes on to say that on a Sunday, when the boys used to feed their guinea pig and feed the goldfish and stuff like that, he would be in the kitchen with them, sort of chopping up vegetables and stuff to feed the guinea pigs and stuff. No, especially as he'd spent the night before. What was she doing? Anyway, Wendy Berry said that the ease between Diana and James should have really set off alarm bells ringing to anyone with their interests at heart. Now, she still doesn't think that they're having an affair at this stage. She says it was a mutual infatuation that was going in a dangerous direction. So if that's true, well, then I guess I was too judgmental, wasn't I? Because it's perfectly fine to give the boys riding lessons because they weren't, Wendy Berry thinks there wasn't an affair yet. I don't know, I'm so confused. So Diana's got her own special friend now, just like the prince, chuckled Chris Barber, one of the chefs. I suppose it could only have been expected. Now, she goes on to get quite annoyed. She goes, I became quite bothered by the frequency of James' visits and dreaded the prince asking me a question about him. Well, you would dread it, wouldn't you? So she decided I would treat the whole matter as a gentle infatuation, at least until there was evidence to the contrary. Now, she says she didn't receive evidence of an affair until 12 months later. Now, I assume that would probably be something at Highgrove that she stumbled upon, or the fact she saw that they shared a bedroom or something. So they were sort of sneaking around at this stage. They were on their best behaviour. They were keeping it from the staff. Well, not on their best behaviour, but you know what I mean. They weren't being blatant about anything, if anything was going on at this stage. But then they got a little careless, and that's when Wendy Berry got proof that she was having an affair with James Hewitt. But she said that was about 12 months later. So we're at the start of 88. And so, yeah. So 89, she got proof. Meanwhile, Charles's nocturnal visits to Camilla continued as before. And, this is interesting. They used to use the Royal Train. And she states the fact that after an engagement, the Royal Train was originally booked for departure at 11 p.m, but it was changed to 2 a.m. on the morning of June the 2nd. So Charles is being really naughty with Camilla in the Royal Train. Diana is being really naughty with James Hewitt at Highgrove whenever Charles isn't there. So they're basically, they're really separated. They're officially still together, but they're really, in their hearts, minds and lifestyles, they're separated. Then we go on to Diana's 27th birthday. She said she didn't want any fuss. And it's interesting that William and Harry had Ella, Prince and Princess Michael's daughter, little Gabriella Kent, come over to play. And evidently Diana just absolutely adored this little girl and they got on really well. And Wendy Berry does state a few times that she feels that if Diana had have had the opportunity to have another child, and especially to have a little girl, that she might have been quite content, because when she saw her with Ella, she realised just how much she would have loved a little girl and how good she would have been with a little girl. And yeah, she thinks that that was a pity that that didn't happen, that it was just like stopped at the two, you know, the heir and the spare, done my duty, that's it, you know. And she thinks that Diana probably, yeah. Anyway, I don't know. I don't think children can actually fix a marriage like this one. Do you? So Ella had a bad accident on a climbing frame and broke her collarbone. And she had to go off to hospital. And Ruth Wallace, William and Harry's nanny, used to be Ella's nanny. And so she went off with her to the hospital and stayed overnight while she was in the hospital. Makes you wonder, where are the parents? Where are the parents? Oh, Nanny, you go and stay with her. She'll be... I mean, when my little boy broke his wrist skateboarding, you couldn't keep me from being with him in the hospital. I mean, it's weird, isn't it? It's just this detachment, this cold detachment from their children. It's brutal, brutal. Anyway, now this is where it's interesting. Charles was going off to play polo, and originally it was going to be Diana, Ella, William and Harry going to go to the polo and watch Charles play. This is not the first day. The first day they were going on a play date. The second day they were going to go and watch the polo. Now this is interesting. Diana took William the following day to the polo. And she didn't take Harry because she didn't have a nanny, because the nanny was in the hospital with Ella. So what? She couldn't handle her two boys at the polo without a nanny? Gee, I mean, that sort of says a lot about Harry. Was he really that much trouble? And so anyway, but it makes me wonder, there's so many instances in this book where Diana does something with William, like has supper with William on a tray in her bed watching a movie, or going to the polo just with William, and Harry being left behind and it being explained to Harry, you know, that he can't come. And he was most miffed about not being able to see his father play, and Diana looked for support with Wendy. Oh, you know the problems, Wendy. The place will be overrun with press, and without Ruth to keep control, the boys could start a riot. Now, where do you think Harry would have got his hatred of the press? Because he wanted to go to the polo, William got to go, Harry was left behind, and the excuse given to him was because of the press. Okay, so I'm just wondering whether Harry really is blaming the wrong parent here, because there's so much evidence in this book of Diana planting the seeds that was to be his sort of warped trauma into his adult life. And I'll just read you the final little snippet of this chapter because it's very, very telling. Diana goes on to say to Harry, "Don't worry, darling. Let's ask James to teach you about polo the next time we see him." Harry looked up and smiled, mirroring the expression on his mother's face. Now, I don't know about you. The poor kid couldn't go. He was told it was the press's fault. And then she dangles the lover to teach him about polo next time they see him. Oh no, it's a really, really toxic situation. I'm a bit concerned. I'll be back with chapter 9 very shortly. Thanks a lot. Bye.